Welcome back to another episode of Out Loud Geek, where we discuss news and views about pop culture, science fiction, fantasy, food, cooking, the outdoors, and more. With Halloween just around the corner from the time that I'm recording this video, I wanted to share my favorite shows and movies for this particular spooky holiday. And I'll begin with a holiday classic. Premiering back on October 27th, 1966, It's The Great Pumpkin Charlie Brown was the second holiday special that animator Charles Schultz wrote. The show premiered less than a year after his first holiday special, A Charlie Brown Christmas, had premiered on December 9th, 1965, as I had talked about in my video entitled My Top 10 Favorite Christmas Films and Shows that I had released on December 21st, 2022. In this particular special, which I have enjoyed since I was a kid, the Peanuts gang prepares for and celebrates Halloween, but they don't all experience the holiday in the same way. The show's central plot focuses on Linus Van Pelt's unwavering belief in the Great Pumpkin, which is a mythical figure that he believes rises from pumpkin patches on Halloween night to deliver presents to sincere children. So as he spends Halloween evening in what he believes is a sincere but otherwise unremarkable pumpkin patch, hoping for the Great Pumpkin's arrival, his sister Lucy, Charlie Brown, and other Peanuts characters go trick-or-treating, but not before Charlie's little sister Sally, who is infatuated with Linus, decides to forego the festivities to wait with him in the pumpkin patch. Meanwhile, Charlie Brown, who always seems to have bad luck, faces his own Halloween struggles by only receiving rocks instead of candy while trick-or-treating in his ghost costume that has too many holes cut into it. But he does get to attend Violet's Halloween party, even though Lucy had told him that the invitation that he had received was an obvious mistake. Snoopy spends Halloween imagining himself to be a World War I fighting ace who gets shot down over France, then manages to find his way into a house which turns out to be Violet's. And after upsetting Lucy while she's bobbing for apples, Snoopy leaves the party and sneaks into the pumpkin patch. Then, as he starts to stand up, Linus mistakes Snoopy for the Great Pumpkin and faints, while Sally gets very upset for having missed out on trick-or-treating and Violet's party. Eventually, at 4 a.m, Lucy gets up and walks out to the pumpkin patch to bring Linus inside and put him to bed, but he continues to defend his belief in the Great Pumpkin to Charlie Brown the next day. The show remains well-loved today for its heartwarming and humorous portrayal of childhood and the charm of the various Peanuts characters. My next favorite premiered on March 30th, 1988, and is the Tim Burton-directed comedic dark fantasy Beetlejuice, starring Alec Baldwin, Geena Davis, Michael Keaton, and Winona Ryder. And what I like about the movie is its irreverent humor, imaginative world-building, and Keaton's iconic portrayal of the titular character Beetlejuice. The movie focuses on a recently deceased couple, Barbara and Adam Maitland, as played by Davis and Baldwin, who become ghosts trapped in their own home following a traffic accident in their town of Winter River, Connecticut. When a new family, the Dietzes, move in, the Maitlands try unsuccessfully to scare them away as they struggle with their supernatural abilities. They then become increasingly more desperate when Delia Dietz, as played by Catherine O'Hara, accompanied by her interior designer friend Otho, as played by the late Glenn Shaddix, plan to remodel the house that the Maitlands had been restoring prior to their deaths. Having seen a flyer for a self-proclaimed bio-exorcist named Beetlejuice that had fallen out of a frustratingly complicated book that they had found in their home after dying, the handbook for the recently deceased, they decide to get his help in spite of warnings that they had received from their caseworker Juno, as played by the late Sylvia Sidney, who they met after being in an otherworldly waiting room for 6 months that they had traveled to not long after the Dietzes had moved in. Beetlejuice scares the Dietzes, including their goth teenage daughter Lydia, as played by Ryder, in whom he takes a particular interest in and who is able to both see and talk with the Maitlands. But having called upon Beetlejuice incurs the anger of Juno, who is also upset that the Maitlands allowed Otho to get a hold of the handbook for the recently deceased, which he then uses to conduct a seance at the behest of Charles Dietz, as played by Jeffrey Jones, to force the Maitlands to appear because he wants to turn Winter River into a supernatural tourist resort. But when the Maitlands appear to be crumbling into dust because Otho doesn't actually know what he's doing, Lydia finds Beetlejuice, who she summons by saying his name 3 times when he claims that he can save the Maitlands. Beetlejuice succeeds, but then he tries to force Lydia to marry him until the Maitlands are able to intervene in order to save her. The Maitlands then decide to allow the Dietzes to remain in their home. The film's blend of humor, dark fantasy, quirky characters, themes of the afterlife, and clashes between the living and the dead, combined with Tim Burton's unique visual style, has made the movie a cult classic. Next on my list is a movie that premiered on June 8, 1984, Ghostbusters, which was directed by Ivan Reitman and starred Bill Murray, Dan Aykroyd, the late Harold Ramis, Ernie Hudson, Sigourney Weaver, Rick Moranis, and Annie Potts. It was Ramis, Aykroyd, and Moranis who wrote the movie, and the movie's theme song, which became a huge hit on its own, was composed by Ray Parker Jr. The film's story follows a group of eccentric parapsychologists, Dr. Peter Venkman as played by Murray, Dr. Raymond Stantz as played by Aykroyd, and Dr. Egon Spengler as played by Ramis, who decide to go into business for themselves in New York City as the Ghostbusters after losing their university positions due to the nature of their studies. Operating out of a former fire station, they develop specialized equipment to capture and contain troublesome ghosts and spirits, and hire Winston Zedmore, as played by Hudson, to work with them on calls, and a receptionist, Janine Melnitz, as played by Potts. As their Ghostbusters business gains popularity, they are called upon to investigate a number of paranormal incidents, including one reported by Dana Barrett, as played by Weaver, who saw demonic-looking dogs in her refrigerator and a voice saying the name Zool. Dana is eventually possessed by Zool the Gatekeeper, which is one of the demonic dog creatures, as is her nerdy accountant neighbor Louis Tully, as played by Moranis, by the other dog creature, which is named Vinz Clortho, the Keymaster. From his research, Egon had learned that Zool was a demigod worshipped as a servant to Gozer the Gozerian, which was a shape-shifting god of destruction. The city is then plunged into darkness after the overeager EPA agent Walter Peck, as played by William Atherton, had obtained a court order to have the Ghostbusters containment system shut down, which frees all of the ghosts and other malevolent spirits that they had captured, who then congregate around Dana's apartment building. But the smooth-talking Venkman convinces the New York City mayor, as played by the late David Margulies, to return their equipment and let them deal with the paranormal situation. Traveling to Dana's apartment building, they go up to the building's roof to find Dana and Tully transforming into the demonic dog-like creatures. Then Gozer appears as a woman and attacks the Ghostbusters, but then disappears when they attempt to retaliate. Her disembodied voice then demands that the Ghostbusters, quote, choose the form of the destructor, unquote. Ray inadvertently recalls a beloved corporate mascot from his childhood, which then reappears as a gigantic Stay-Puft Marshmallow Man that begins destroying the city. Against his earlier advice, Egon instructs the team to cross their proton energy streams at the dimensional gate. The resulting explosion then destroys Gozer's avatar, banishing it back to its own dimension and closes the gateway. The Ghostbusters then rescue the restored Dana and Louis from the wreckage and are welcomed on the street below as heroes. Ghostbusters is celebrated for its blend of humor, supernatural elements, and memorable characters. Another one of my favorites is a film that premiered originally on August 31st, 1975 in Italy, before premiering a month later in the US. And it's the musical horror comedy Rocky Horror Picture Show, which was directed by Jim Sharman and stars Tim Curry, Susan Sarandon, Barry Bostwick, Richard O'Brien, who also co-wrote the movie with Sharman, Patricia Quinn, Nell Campbell, Jonathan Adams, Peter Henwood, the late Meatloaf, and the late Charles Gray. The movie combines elements of science fiction, horror, and rock and roll to create a unique and very unconventional experience with a story that begins with an innocent and newly engaged couple, Brad Majors as played by Bostwick and Janet Weiss as played by Sarandon, who find themselves lost on a dark and stormy night after attending a wedding and their car breaks down. Soaked, they seek shelter in a mysterious and eerie-looking nearby castle inhabited by the flamboyant and eccentric Dr. Frankenfurter as played by Curry, who is a sweet transvestite from the planet Transsexual in the galaxy of Transylvania. The castle is also inhabited by his servants Riffraff as played by O'Brien, Magenta as played by Quinn, and Columbia as played by Campbell. Brad and Janet then become unwittingly entangled within the bizarre and sexually liberated world of the castle's inhabitants, which includes Frankenfurter's eccentric and diverse group of followers as he embarks on creating a perfect lover, a muscular blonde that he names Rocky, as played by Henwood. There are also periodic interludes with an expert criminologist, as played by Gray, who explains what's going on. The film unfolds as a madcap and psychedelic musical spectacle with transgressive themes and humorous twists as it explores themes of sexual liberation, gender identity, and nonconformity against a backdrop of catchy and memorable songs that include Time Warp and Sweet Transvestite. The movie is still shown in some theaters to this day during midnight showings for those who want to experience the audience participation that includes callouts with some dressing up as the characters. My next favorite premiered on October 16th, 1998, the supernatural romantic comedy Practical Magic, which was based on the novel of the same name by Alice Hoffman and was directed by Griffin Dunn. The movie stars Sandra Bullock, Nicole Kidman, Stockard Channing, Diane Wiest, Goran Vizinchik, and Aidan Quinn. The movie follows the lives of two New England sisters, Sally Owens as played by Bullock, and her sister Jillian as played by Kidman. They come from a long line of witches with a tragic history of love that began with their ancestor Maria Owens, as played by Caprice Benedette, who, after the father of her unborn child never returned to her, cast a spell upon herself to prevent her from ever falling in love again, that later turned into a curse upon her descendants for any man who fell in love with an Owens woman. As young girls, they are raised by their eccentric aunts, Frances, as played by Channing, and Jet, as played by Wiest, after their parents both succumb to the curse, and they are ridiculed by other children who know that they are witches. Knowing about the curse, and after witnessing their aunts cast a love spell for a woman obsessed with her beloved, the young Sally casts a spell upon herself to ensure that she will only fall in love with a man who possesses multiple traits that she believes are impossible so that she won't be able to fall in love. But the young Jillian, who is more of a free spirit, can't wait to fall in love. And when they grow up into adults, Jillian decides to explore an adventurous path, spending the next decade moving from relationship to relationship across the country until she becomes involved with a rotten boyfriend, Jimmy Angelov, as played by Vizinchik. And as Sally tries to lead a more normal and responsible life, she meets and marries a man named Michael, as played by Mark Feuerstein, with whom she has two daughters, Kylie and Antonia. But he tragically succumbs to the curse, after which the aunts confide to Sally that they had put a small love spell on her, so she forbids them from ever teaching her daughters any magic. But one night, Jillian contacts Sally to tell her that she's in trouble, so Sally immediately goes to her and is taken hostage along with Jillian by Jimmy in his car. Making Sally drive, she puts a small amount of belladonna into his tequila to knock him out so that they can escape, but he ends up dying, leading the sisters to use their magical powers to try to bring him back to life, but with unintended consequences that include Jillian becoming possessed by Jimmy's spirit. Then lawman Gary Hallett, as played by Quinn, who possesses the impossible traits from Sally's love spell from when she was a child, arrives looking for Jimmy and wants to talk with the sisters. With help from the aunts and women in the town who had once ridiculed the sisters when they were all growing up together, they are all forced to confront their family's history and the curse, which they break in order to save Jillian. Practical Magic combines elements of romance and fantasy to explore themes of love, family, and the acceptance of one's true self, and the film works thanks to the performances of Bullock, Kidman, Channing, and Wiest, as well as how the film blends the magical with the mundane. Now entering the second half of my list, the next movie premiered on June 4th, 1982, and is entitled Poltergeist, which was directed by Tobe Hooper, but was co-written and co-produced by Steven Spielberg. It stars JoBeth Williams, the late Heather O'Rourke, Craig T. Nelson, the late Beatrice Straight, the late Zelda Rubinstein, Oliver Robbins, and the late Dominic Dunn. The movie revolves around the Freeling family, Steve, as played by Nelson, Diane, as played by Williams, and their 3 children, Dana, as played by Dunn, Robbie, as played by Robbins, and Carol Ann, as played by O'Rourke. They had been living seemingly happy and ordinary lives in their peaceful neighborhood until they begin to experience increasingly disturbing and malevolent paranormal activities within their suburban home. At first, the activity seems playful, with objects moving on their own. But it quickly escalates into a terrifying series of events, with youngest daughter Carol Ann becoming the focal point of the paranormal forces that include her mysteriously vanishing into another dimension through her bedroom closet. Desperate to retrieve their daughter, the Freelings turn to a group of paranormal investigators led by Dr. Leash, as played by Straight, and medium Tangina Behrens, as played by Rubinstein. As they delve deeper into the supernatural occurrences, they discover that the family's home and the entire neighborhood were built over a cemetery, with only the gravestones having been moved but not the coffins. After Tangina explains to Carol Ann's parents why the main malevolent spirit took her into its realm and what it actually is, Carol Ann's mother Diane goes into the realm to retrieve Carol Ann. Successful, the family believes that the nightmare is over until the malevolent spirit starts up again, but the family flees the house with neighbors watching it be completely destroyed and pulled through the doorway that the spirit had been able to punch into the natural world. Poltergeist is known for its combination of eerie and intense horror moments, blended with Spielberg's signature family-friendly storytelling that explores the lengths that a family will go to protect one another from the forces of evil. Next on my list is a movie that premiered on December 15th, 1974 and was directed by Mel Brooks, the horror comedy parody Young Frankenstein that starred the late Gene Wilder, the late Madeline Kahn, the late Marty Feldman, the late Peter Boyle, the late Cloris Leachman, and Terri Garr. Based on Mary Shelley's original story and old horror movies, the film follows the adventures of skilled neurosurgeon Dr. Frederick Frankenstein, as played by Wilder, who is the grandson of the infamous Dr. Victor Frankenstein. Initially, Dr. Frederick Frankenstein tries to distance himself from his grandfather's legacy, including different pronunciation of his last name, but is lured to Transylvania after inheriting the family's ancestral castle. There, he becomes intrigued by his grandfather's work in reanimating the dead. And with the help of an oddball cast of characters, including his hunchbacked assistant Igor, as played by Feldman, and the seductive Inga, as played by Garr, he decides to continue his grandfather's experiments and bring a corpse to life. His monster, as played by Boyle, initially has a bad brain thanks to Igor, but through another experiment, Frederick stabilizes his monster's brain with his own. The film cleverly parodies the original Frankenstein movies with numerous comedic twists. The mishaps and absurdities that ensue are played for laughs, from the famous Put the Candle Back scene to the memorable Transylvanian Lullaby musical number. Next on my list is another Tim Burton movie, and it premiered on December 14th, 1990. The comedic fantasy Edward Scissorhands that stars Johnny Depp, Winona Ryder, Diane Wiest, Anthony Michael Hall, and the late Vincent Price. With Burton's whimsical and gothic aesthetic, the story revolves around the character Edward, as played by Depp, who is a gentle and reclusive young man who has scissors for hands and was created by an inventor, as played by Price, who passed away before he could complete Edward's hands. Edward lives in isolation in a gothic castle on a hill that overlooks a colorful suburban community, but his life takes an unexpected turn when a kind-hearted Avon saleswoman named Peg Boggs, as played by Wiest, discovers him. She decides to take him into her home, and Edward quickly becomes an integral part of the neighborhood, using his unique Scissorhands for various tasks like hairstyling and topiary sculpture. And as Edward becomes more deeply involved in the lives of the townspeople, he forms a special connection with Peg's teenage daughter Kim, as played by Ryder. But as he navigates the complex human world, Edward's differences and unusual appearance lead to acceptance from some, but rejection from others, which eventually force him to leave and return to the castle. The film explores themes of conformity, acceptance, the beauty of uniqueness, and the darkness that can lurk beneath suburban facades, and is renowned for its visually striking and surreal design, evoking a sense of both wonder and melancholy. My next to last movie on this list premiered in New York and Los Angeles in January 1963, but never had a full theatrical release across the US, though it did in several European countries, beginning with Italy on August 29, 1963. Named The Raven, it was directed by Roger Corman and is loosely based on Edgar Allan Poe's poem of the same name. And it had an all-star cast for its day: the late Vincent Price, the late Peter Lorre, the late Boris Karloff, the late Hazel Court, Olive Sturgis, and a rather young Jack Nicholson in one of his earliest roles. The horror comedy film story is set primarily within a medieval European castle and focuses on the character Dr. Erasmus Craven, as played by Price, who is a morose and grieving widower mourning the loss of his beloved wife Lenore, as played by Court, who he believes to be dead. However, when a talking raven, who claims to be a transformed wizard, arrives at Craven's doorstep, Craven's world is turned upside down. The raven is actually Dr. Bedloe, as played by Lorre, and was turned into a raven by the evil sorcerer Dr. Scarabus, as played by Karloff. Bedloe seeks Craven's help to reverse the spell and regain his human form, which leads to a series of supernatural and comedic misadventures. Craven, Bedloe, Craven's daughter Estelle, as played by Sturgis, and Bedloe's son Rexford, as played by Nicholson, become embroiled in a rivalry with Dr. Scarabus, who is a powerful and malevolent sorcerer. With its tongue-in-cheek approach to Poe's work, the film is filled with magical duels, comedic exchanges, and moments of dark humor as the characters clash with the evil sorcerer and his followers. We've now reached the 10th and final film on my list of favorite Halloween shows and movies, and it's another Tim Burton movie that premiered on November 19th, 1999, Sleepy Hollow, which stars Johnny Depp, Christina Ricci, Miranda Richardson, the recently deceased Michael Gambon, Casper Van Dien, Jeffrey Jones, the late Richard Griffiths, Ian McDiarmid, the late Michael Goff, and Christopher Walken. This gothic horror film is loosely based on Washington Irving's classic short story, The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, and combines elements of mystery, horror, and fantasy. Set in the year 1799, Ichabod Crane, as played by Depp, is a New York City police constable with a strong belief in science and a strong aversion to the supernatural. He is sent to the remote and eerie village of Sleepy Hollow to investigate a series of gruesome murders in which the victims are all decapitated, and their deaths are attributed to a vengeful spirit who terrorizes the town at night and is called the Headless Horseman, as played by Walken. Armed with his scientific methods and complicated array of instruments, Ichabod initially dismisses the legend of the Headless Horseman as superstition. But as he delves deeper into his investigation, he begins to encounter the supernatural as he uncovers dark secrets hidden within the village and becomes entangled in a complex web of relationships involving the wealthy Van Tassel family, which includes the enchanting Katrina Van Tassel, as played by Ritchie, and her sinister stepmother, Lady Van Tassel, as played by Richardson. The mystery unfolds with a mix of horror and suspense, and Ichabod must confront his own fears and beliefs as he seeks to solve the murders. Featuring Tim Burton's signature aesthetics and quirky characters, the film's dark cinematography evokes an eerie and unsettling mood and skillfully combines elements of horror, folktale, and mystery that result in a visually captivating and suspenseful tale. My final thoughts in this video is that I hope you have a happy and safe Halloween. Thanks for watching today, and a huge thanks to everyone who has subscribed to our channel. We appreciate your support. If you enjoyed this video, please press the like button, and please feel free to share a comment. If you'd like to help support this channel, please press the red subscribe button, and please press the bell to receive notifications for new content. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, and Twitter by clicking on the links in the description. Until next time, this is Out Loud Geek.